So, sculpting in Blender. This, I would not recommend sculpting in Blender unless you are layout or unless you don't have access to other programs like ZBrush or Mudbox. Mudbox, I believe, is terrible, but it's, it's about the same level as Blender. Blender is actually pretty decent for sculpture compared to a lot of the free stuff you can get. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another cube. And this is just, this cube particularly is to demonstrate something. If I go down here, if I click up here to change the mode and go into sculpture mode, then you can see that we can start kind of doing something. However, the amount of geometry that's here doesn't really help. I can do a few things. I could go into a modifier, add a subdivision surface, maybe crank it up a few times and then press apply. And this will give me more geometry to work on. However, Blender has something called dynamic topology. This feature was actually missing in ZBrush for a fair amount of time, though you would just remesh everything with dynamic topology. Naming systems in between programs can be a little bit weird, and I apologize. I'll be teaching ZBrush to people doing characters and monsters within modeling. And hopefully everybody, but that's who I will be focusing on it for. So if I go in here, how do I enable this dynamic topology? If I go up here and press this button, it'll tell me that vertex data is detected, and it won't preserve colors, UVs, or other custom data. That's quite alright for what we're doing. So you can see now that I can draw on the object. And if I go into view mode, you can see that wherever I draw is automatically subdivided, such as over here. The way that you change this is, what this is based off of, for how much it subdivides, is based on up here. You can change the detail size from relative to constant detail, which will be world-based rather than screen-based, brush detail, and manual detail. So if I change it to brush detail, for instance, it'll completely depend on how small my brush is. This is very good if you are trying to force yourself to work on big forms first and then move smaller and smaller and smaller. If I press Shift, you can see that it smooths everything. However, unlike ZBrush, it does not soften everything. I should also mention that ZBrush can work with much higher poly counts and work much faster. Just because it uses a proprietary technology that I forget the exact name is. Oh yes, pixels, I believe. Anyway, you can see on the left here that we have quite a selection of different brushes. And if I go hover over the border of this, I can drag it out forward so it condenses a little bit. Personally, I like to use clay buildup when building up basic shapes, because it gives me more control over the form, especially if I'm using an actual brush and not a mouse. So I must apologize for that. You can see that this has mirroring automatically turned on. However, that might not be what you want, such as if you're sculpting rocks. So if you go up here, you can turn X off so that you turn X symmetry off. That's the words. Under options here, there are a few minor options. I wouldn't worry about these at all. And in this mode, I would mainly focus on, sculptural ability and actually getting in there and sculpting the object together. If you press F, you can scale up and down the brush stroke. If you press Control, you can do subtractive or additive. It'll be reversing whatever the mode it is in at the moment. So you can see that when I press Control with the subtractive brush, it adds it. If I go over to Clay Buildup, which is an additive tool, and not press Control, it adds, but when I press Control, it subtracts. Anyway, I believe that's pretty much all the basic functionality. With the modeling team, I'm going to focus on having us actually finish sculptures and clean up the mesh and do everything as if it was a full asset. But for the layout team, you don't have to worry about geometry or really detail or subdivision levels very much, as long as it works fast enough on your computer. And I'll be going into a few more details in a little bit, but I would highly recommend that everybody simply play with tools for the moment. After I go into specific videos for modeling and more advanced techniques in modeling, and then more advanced techniques in modeling for layout, then I'll be asking everybody to do a test object so that I can see and critique and try to help and clarify any issues that you might not understand. This will be a trial run in the whole asset workflow, so after the assets are done, I'll pop that over to texturing, and after we have UVs and low poly done, I'll give that to texturing and they'll test out texturing everything. Alright, thank you very much, and I hope this was informative.